You're listening to Saturday Morning Media. And now, back to our show. Hello and welcome back to the GrantCast. My name is Grant Baciocco. Great to have you all here. Sorry, I have not been publishing recently. You know what happened was I got into this thing where I really liked those kind of episodes I did where it was like a story, but then I talked about the history of something, and then I tied it into this story, this personal thing together. And I was like, well, I can't do another episode until I come up with something like that. That is what the podcast is now. And I realized that I may not come up with something like that. I actually do have a few ideas to do, but I just wanted to sit and record this podcast because I did think of something recently, and you know me, I like sharing my thoughts with you, the 10 people who listen to the GrantCast. I wanted to talk about my favorite podcasts, my absolute favorite podcasts. And now, if you are any sort of follower of the work I create, or just follower of me in general, you should know that it is absolutely no surprise at all that I'm a huge Disney fan, a huge Disney parks fan. I love the Disney parks. And I found this podcast called Retro WDW. Retro WDW. You can go to retrowdw.com, or you can just search for it wherever you get your podcasts. But retrowdw.com, it is a podcast that focuses on Walt Disney World. Now, I know that there are these history podcasts. There's a very popular one, which the name I'm blanking on, like Hardcore History, I think. And like some of the episodes are like 3 hours long because the guy talks about some aspect of history. He does a bunch of research on it and does. These four gentlemen who do Retro WDW do that, but with Walt Disney World attractions or something related to Walt Disney World. So they will do like a 2-hour episode on one ride, and it's really fantastic, and I love it. It's sort of like NPR for Disney nerds. You know, it's like in-depth, just stuff you don't need to know about the parks, but I want to know and they want to know, and it's just a great podcast. So if you would all love retro Walt Disney World or Disney parks, check it out because it's a lot of fun. They even did an episode recently on SeaWorld, which is not Disney related, but it was just as fascinating. So anyway, I was thinking about this podcast and about how much I love this podcast. Let me tell you the things I do with this podcast is I will save episodes of this podcast to listen to until I've listened to all the other podcasts in my queue. Now, it's interesting with this whole pandemic thing. My podcast listening has changed. I find that I think it's because I'm not driving as much. I don't listen to as many podcasts. So I've still been subscribed. I haven't like kicked off any podcasts and been like, I'm not listening to you anymore. But I've not listened to episodes of podcasts because I want to focus my listening on the ones that I really, really love. So I'm still subscribed, and I'm sure, hopefully, knock on wood, when things get back to normal, I'll be going back and listening to those podcasts and all that kind of stuff. But anyway, Retro WDW, if I can say it, is my favorite. You can find a link to it in the show notes. And what I will do is, if they have a new episode that comes out, I will make sure that I listen to all the other podcasts in my thing before I start that episode, because it's like I want to give my undivided attention to these episodes because they're so good. And so right now I have a sort of a backlog of these episodes, and I'm loving it because I'm a couple months behind. Now, here's the thing. They release one episode a month. Sometimes, every once in a while, if they get a good interview, they will release that interview in the middle of the month, but for the most part, they will just release one episode a month. Now, when I started Under the Puppet, the podcast that I produce where I interview puppeteers, I said, I'm only going to release this once a month because if I did a podcast episode every week where I interviewed somebody every single week and I put it out, I would run through puppeteers like a forest fire, because there's not there are a lot of puppeteers, but compared to other occupations, there's not a lot of puppeteers. Like, you could start a podcast where you interview football players and you would never end. You could do one episode a week and you could go on forever, because just in the history of currently playing and past playing and whatever. But with puppeteers, it's a smaller group of people. And so that was my goal. My goal was, I'm just going to release one episode a month. And then towards the beginning of this year, I got it in my head to do these, what I like to call mid-month episodes that are more focused on something specific about puppetry. So they'll be more focused. So like I did a puppeteer roundtable on auditions, and that was a mid-month episode. So it wasn't one of my big interviews. It was a mid-month interview where I interviewed people about a topic. So I interviewed 2 professional working puppeteers about auditions and how should puppeteers handle auditions. And that episode was great. I did one on the O'Neill Puppetry Conference. That episode was great. I did one on the Center for Puppetry Arts XPT program. That was great. I did one on the puppets of Coco, the musical spectacular at the Hollywood Bowl. That was fantastic. So I did these little mid-month things. I did one on the Vent Haven Museum, which is the museum with all the ventriloquist stuff. That was great. These are great interviews. I'm not saying great from my end. I mean, they're just interesting interviews. The people who I interviewed are fantastic. Great to talk to. But I got into my head of this thing of like, let's put out a bunch of content. Come on, we'll put out these main interviews on the first of the month, and then we'll do these mid-month interviews, and they'll be focused, and they'll be on this thing. And, then I started thinking about the Retro WDW podcast and about how their podcasts come out once a month and how special I think that those podcast episodes are, because I know it only comes out once a month, and I wait to clear my podcast queue before I listen to it because I just want to focus on it, and it's just so good and it's so great. And it really, thinking about that recently, made me think I want to make Under the Puppet that special for fans of the show. And I know fans of the show are often like, no, you could give me 12 interviews a week and I would love it. I get it. I understand that. But there's sort of this thing, I sort of equate it to wrestling, where if you have your champion, your main champion, defend the belt on every single show, it doesn't make the belt as special as if you only let the champion the champion only defends the belt once every 4 shows. That makes it more special. Sort of like Andre the Giant. If you have Andre the Giant on every single show, that's, people love Andre the Giant. He's great. But if he's on every single show, people go, yeah, okay, that's Andre the Giant. Yeah, that's great. After a while. But if Andre the Giant only shows up once a month, it's a big deal because today's the day. Andre the Giant's going to show up. Now, I'm not comparing my podcast to a wrestling champion or Andre the Giant, but what I'm saying is, if you treat it as if it's something special, it has the possibility. I'm not saying it is special, because I would never say that about my work. I think my work needs a lot of improvement at times. But that's a whole different episode I can talk to you about, or my therapist. But if you don't put out something every single week or every other week or whatever, and you only do something once a month, to me, it makes it special. And I think that I kind of lost my focus. I lost my focus of this podcast. Now, of course, the original focus of doing one episode a month was just because there were not that many puppeteers to interview. But doing these multiple interviews, I feel, takes away from my preparation for the main interviews and makes them not as fantastic. And that's a personal opinion for me. And I love all the little mid-month interviews I did, but I want to refocus, and I want to make these big interviews really, really special. And I want to make it something that people really look forward to. And I think releasing something releasing a mid-month was not working for Under the Puppet. So, yeah, that's what Retro WDW taught me. Now, as I said, Retro WDW does do these mid-month podcasts. I will tell you a story. I interviewed, this was several episodes ago, but for Under the Puppet, I interviewed Nina Conti, who, if you don't know Nina Conti, she's hilarious. She's a ventriloquist from the UK. She's so funny. She is one of my favorite performers. I could watch her perform all the time and just cry because it's so funny. And Nina Conti was going to be in Southern California, and I reached out through her management company and asked if she could come do this interview. And she said yes, but she said, I will do it if you can get it out later that day because I'm doing a show that weekend. And I said, absolutely, because I would love to have you on the show, and I think you're brilliant. So, yes, I will do that. So what I'm saying is there may still be mid-month things. I'm just not going to make it a regular thing. And that's all because of this Retro WDW podcast and how great their podcasts are. And that is, it's sort of that thing. It's like you should find, not that they're my mentor, but you find somebody to pattern your career or your creativity after, and to kind of guide you, to kind of inspire you, and to lead you to how you should do things. And I love the way that Retro WDW does things, and so I was like, I want to make my podcast a little bit more like Retro WDW. Now, I already have in one aspect, and that is doing a giveaway on every episode, because they do a giveaway on every episode. And I've sort of instituted that, and I've gotten really good feedback about that and some really fun stuff coming down the pike. But anyway, I was just thinking about this. And what do you think? I would love to know what you think. You can leave a comment on the website, or you can send me a message on Twitter or Instagram or wherever it is. I don't care. Just reach out. But let me know what you think, because it's an interesting concept. And it's something I've been thinking a lot about recently, about just trying to make it. I'm always trying to improve. I'm always trying to improve things. And I think this might improve things. I don't know. Anyway, there you go. Thank you for listening to this. Hopefully I'll be back with an episode soon. We've been quarantined, so there's not a lot to talk about. But I will try and think of some things and then get back to you soon. But thank you so much for listening to this rambling, and I will talk to you later. This episode of the GrantCast is copyright 2020 Saturday Morning Media. Grant Baciocco, executive producer, all rights reserved. www.saturdaymorningmedia.com.
You've been listening to Saturday Morning Media. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.